Hello, everybody. Today we're going to look at spring bulbs, but not spring bulbs as you're probably used to, especially as we did a session last year about how to grow bulbs that you have in a pot and in the sunnier style. This time we're going to look at small bulbs and small plants, which are normally known as alpine plants. So what I'm going to do first is to talk us through a PowerPoint presentation, which shows you some of the things in flower, because obviously it's now September and they won't be in flower until the spring. And also talk about what are alpines and how do we grow them and so on. And then afterwards, I'm going to show you how to plant up a pot practically. So let's start with what are alpines? Well, alpines are small plants that would in nature have grown at the top of mountains. So they're very cold hardy. And the reason they're small is because they're having to survive in windy or cold conditions. So what you might see in a normal garden plant will be reduced in size. And it's quite fun then to plant up parts of the garden or pots to sort of replicate that situation. And because they're found on the top of mountains, they're going to be really hardy, so very good for Scottish winters. What they do like, as you can imagine, if they're on top of a mountain, they're going to be very, very well drained because of the water will run through the rocks and so on. So we need to make sure that we can replicate that as well in our planting. So how are we going to plant these things? Where do they come from? So as I said, mountainous regions, gritty, free draining soil. So in a garden, people used to have rockeries, and some people still have rockeries, and that's particularly built for this type of plant and can be quite fun to do. But you might have a very well-drained soil and you want to create what we call a gravel garden, where you can plant them in, put some gravel over the top and know that they're going to grow well because it's very well drained. But if you're in an area with heavy clay or you get very waterlogged in your garden, then it's better to put them in containers because then you can particularly sort out the sort of compost and so on that they're growing in, and they won't rot off, because that's what's going to happen. If they're in a damp conditions, they will rot off. So alpine plants, we are talking about bulbs, but also plants go hand in hand. So I'm going to talk about both. Alpine plants tend to be small perennials coming year to year, small shrubs or bulbs. So the good thing about planting them either in the garden or in a pot is that they're going to be there from year to year. So you don't have to keep replacing them. It's not like an annual planting. And same with the bulbs. The bulbs will come up year after year. So it's a great thing to do and feel that you've got something permanent to grow and to look interesting in the garden. So if you've got the sort of garden where you are or site that you think the soil is well draining, we've got an area in sun because they're obviously on top of mountains, they're open to very bright conditions. So that's the sort of thing you're looking for. Don't plant them in shady conditions. They won't do well at all. So if you've got somewhere which is south or west facing, that would be a good place to plant your alpine plants and your groups of bulbs. You're not going to need to alter the soil if it's well draining. I have quite a lot of sand in my soil, so it will be fine. You could add some sand if you want, but as I say, avoid if it's clay or very heavy soil. So what you'll do is plant the plants in small groups, so especially bulbs. So you'll have maybe 5 together, 7 together, 9 together. It depends on the size of your plot. And put them in a group rather than put them in lines or scatter them individually, because they're small. You want to make an impact. So if you have a group of bulbs together, then it's much better than doing them individually or mixing them up. And your plants, it can be some bulbs, and then maybe a plant, and then maybe some more bulbs of a different sort. Once you've got them planted, that's when you add gravel. And you can see in the picture here some larger stones, but some gravel in between them of different sorts. So that improves the drainage and also stops weeds growing because you're covering the soil. And it makes it look attractive. And there's lots of choice of different sorts of gravel and different sorts of stones. And it also depends where you live and the sort of conditions you have. So if you're planting not in the ground, but in a pot, which is maybe more likely, then ensure that your pot has drainage holes. As I said, because the plants need to be well drained, they must have drainage at the bottom. Now you can see in the top picture, it's not a very big pot. So if you don't have huge pots, you can do just one plant in a pot with gravel around it, which is an Alpine, or one group of bulbs in a pot, which is quite a nice thing to do. So don't worry if you don't have huge pots, and perhaps you're doing it with several people and you want to give everybody a pot each to do. Or you might have a bigger one, and therefore perhaps a group of people can plant that one up as well. So you've got to have drainage holes, number one. Number two, you've got to put crocks, and I'm going to show you what crocks are, but you actually can see in the hand of the person in the top photo, they're bits of broken old pots, things like that. Or you could put gravel, or you could put some stones, but it helps the drainage. It also stops any of the compost from draining through as you water it. What is the sort of compost that you need? Well, you need a mixture, if you can, of half something like multi-purpose compost, but it could be you've got compost you've made in your garden, and in which case I'd mix that compost with a bit of garden soil, perhaps half and half, then half the quantity of horticultural gravel or gravel that you can get. You can buy horticultural gravel in most garden centres, or you might have pea shingle, which you can buy from DIY supermarkets, and often it's cheaper to buy that. Just rinse it over with a bit of water to get any dust out. So you're mixing half and half compost or soil and half gravel, so that it's a really good free draining compost. So you fill up whatever size of pot you have, about 2/3 full. And then you're going to add your Alpine plants spaced out, and your bulbs, again, in groups. So lots of space between them, because this is a very open planting style. You're not wanting to do it as you might do with summer bedding, where you cram things together and you expect them to cover the soil. You actually want to look at the gravel, or look at the stones that you've put in. So at this point, you can, when you fill up then with compost and foam it down, you want to cover the top completely with more gravel, more larger gravel or stones. This is where you can be a bit artistic about how you do it. And you can see in the picture below, what they've done is they've also put stones, larger, sort of like slate and things like that, on its end, just to create another sort of crevice style of planting, which you can see in mountains. So if you have any bigger stones, put them in first before you, or when perhaps the pot is about 2/3 full, put in your really bigger stones. And again, I'll show you in the practical. And then you can plant around that, creating a sort of quite naturalistic look for your pot. Pots, again, have to be placed somewhere sunny, not shady, not where they're going to have trees overhanging them. And what you do once you've planted is you'll want to water. They don't need a lot of water in their lives, but as they're just establishing, you do need to make sure that they get watered and don't dry out. So if there's a very dry day, make sure, stick your finger underneath the stones that you've put on top and just check that the soil is reasonably moist. If it's bone dry, or if you feel your container is very light, then the plant needs a water. But basically, once they're established and in, and of course the bulbs that you plant now will be flowering January, February, March time next year. So then you'll begin to see how well they're growing and how they're doing. But it's a fairly easy system to work. Another thing that you may have seen, and the lower picture I took at the Edinburgh Botanic Gardens, where they have an Alpine house. You can see it at the back. They have a lot of old sinks, which have been covered in this stuff called hypertufa, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And so they've created a little sort of planted, semi-mountain looking thing. So it's quite nice to have something like that. So it's not easy to get old sinks, but you might have somewhere you can get them, or a container. And I've read about people using fish boxes. So if you're by the sea or somewhere where there's a fish market, then you can get hold of fish boxes, which you can cover with a mixture of sand, cement, and leaf mold. Yes, it's much more of a big deal than just planting, but you might have someone who's interested in doing that. And you can get more information from the Alpine Garden Society, which tells you about how to mix it and how to create. And the idea is to create sort of something that looks a bit like stone. Or if you have something like a fish box, if you rough up the sides of it, you can paint it with an exterior masonry paint to make it look, again, more natural looking. But the same thing, you have to have holes for drainage. You need gravel at the bottom. They will be heavy. So if you've decided to use a trough or any big container, you need to place it where it's going to be before you plant it up, because you won't be able to move it. It'll be very heavy. It might be part, as you can see in the bottom picture, of perhaps another area which has low growing things around it and more gravel as well. And again, a sunny open site. So if you're interested in doing bigger things like that, you may have a botanical garden or an open garden near you, and you may be able to go and see them, and it sort of helps for inspiration, really. This photo, both these photos I took this week, so that's in September. So you can see the plants are there. They're not in their element, because that's always in spring into summer that they're going to flower. That's the main time for alpines and alpine bulbs to be flowering. So they continue being sort of evergreen, but they won't be at their greatest in September. But it's a good time to plant up. So I'm just going to talk about a few plants you can use for these pots. If you've got a big garden centre or nursery near you, often they have an area which is marked up for alpine plants. And I went to a very big Dobbies, and they had a whole area full of them. So it's quite easy to know that the plants within that section will be the right sort of plants to go either in your rock garden stroke gravel garden, which is shown in the picture, or go in your container. So you can choose the style you like, because they're all going to do well in that kind of environment. But you could check on the label to make sure that the plant isn't going to spread too far. Some although they're small in height, they can spread a long way, which might not matter if you've got it in a rock garden, but if you've got it in a container, it could be problematic. So look and see what you want to choose, and it's down to you what you like the look of together. I've made a list of some of the plants, but there are many, and you can find many online, of course. So what plants could you use? You could use Armeria, which is sea thrift. And if you look at the image at the very bottom left, it's a white flower thrift. Most often it comes in a pink flower, so it's got spiky leaves at the bottom, and then sends up stems with just this little flower on top. It's very good for bees. I mean, this is a good thing. It gives you another sort of habitat for plants, for insects trying to find nectar, especially early in the year. Thrift will carry on flowering actually through the year, and I've got some with me, and it's got a pink flower on, so you'll see. But that's easy. Dianthus, which is the name. This is all botanical names, but I've also tried to put the common names in as well. Dianthus is the name for pinks or carnations, that range of flowers. But of course, there are little tiny alpine pinks, and they're great. I mean, that's just an example, pop star, a pink one, but it's they're very small. So when I'm saying small, they may not grow bigger than 6 inches, 15 centimeters, 20 centimeters, up to 30, maybe a foot. That's probably the maximum size that you're going to get. And often, like the Armira, the thrift, it has a sort of round rosette of leaves, which once the flowers are over, you trim off the stems. You can see when the flowers are over, and you would just be left with this evergreen mound of leaves, which is attractive in its own right. So Dianthus is a great one because its pinks carry on flowering all during the summer. So it's not a spring one, but it's nice. Phlox, garden phlox are quite tall. These are very little ones. So another good one. Saxifrage is, you may have heard of London Pride or names like that, which again, you have a rosette of leaves, and stems come up and come out with the picture, with the flower. Sedums. Sedums are, again, often put in the garden as taller plants and very good for butterflies and bees. And Alpine sedums are, again, very low growing, spreading, easy to grow, easy to propagate. Most of these plants are very easy. You just divide them and then you can plant them up in another container. So if you get sedum, you buy it in a pot, you may well already be able to divide it up and make several plants from it. House leeks, sempervivums, I've got them here, so I'm going to show you it when I do my planting up, is another sort of succulent, attractive plant, which is easy, survives in dry conditions. Thymus or thymes are very low growing, so they're a nice one to have in an alpine pot, and you can use the thyme anyway for cooking as well. So there's many different varieties. Most of these plants have several different varieties, slightly different coloured flowers or slightly different coloured leaves. But thyme is a nice one to have. It's usually a nice sort of mound of leaves with pretty flowers, which again, bees and butterflies and hoverflies and so on love. The last one I put on this list because it's a nice one, Pulsatilla vulgaris pasque flower. It grows in the spring, and when it flowers as a sort of purpley flower, and then it leaves a beautiful seed head afterwards. So these are nice flowers. I'm sure I can't show you pictures for all of them, but it would be too many pictures. But you can see sort of in the picture how you have slightly different colors, different mounds, some taller, some rounder, but there are many, many flowers to choose from. And as long as you follow the instructions for planting, they should do really well and come up year after year. So what about bulbs? Again, it's going to be more often than not dwarf varieties of plants that you're used to planting in pots or in your garden or whatever. But with bulbs, often they're not marked as alpines. It's easier with the plants because you can see. But when I went to look this week at different places, the smaller, what I would call alpine bulbs, were just mixed up with all the other bulbs in packets. So maybe the way to be able to choose is for looking at what size they're going to be and when they're flowering. And again, they tend to flower earlier and they tend to be smaller. So somewhere between, as I said, 15 centimeters, 6 inches, going up to 30 centimeters a foot. Whereas normal bulbs for gardens tend to be taller than that. Your daffodils tend to be taller, your tulips are taller, and so on. But there are a few particular bulbs which are really nice. So China Doxa, which is the top picture with the blue flower called Glory of Snow, is a really lovely open flower, and that does only come in that very small size. So that's, and a beautiful blue as well. So small but beautiful. On the left, you see a narcissus. That's not minnow. I'm going to show you minnow when I do the display for you. Look for dwarf daffodil. They're more often than not called narcissus rather than daffodil. And again, they will come up as a smaller flower, smaller size. This one is a particular, the one on the bottom of your screen is a small narcissus, and they're really lovely. Iris reticulata. On the next page, I'll show you what an iris looks like. But you know basically what an iris looks like, I'm sure. Reticulata is small. So reticulata is just its species name. You may just see iris and it has a name, blue or a particular name. Again, look on the label and see how small it is. And that will tell you it's an iris which is meant for smaller, for the sort of thing that we're talking about here. Muscari, grape hyacinth, you've probably seen. Again, I'm going to have a picture of it. That's fine. They're all small. So whatever you choose, and it'll be in the blue range of colours with white as well. They're easy, tough, very easy, and easy to get hold of too. The tulip, the dwarf tulip, I've put the species names in case you happen to buy one that has those names on them, Kaufmanniana or Greggii, but you don't have to look for those. Again, look for tulips, which tend to be very open, rather than the slightly more, well, what we think of as tulip sort of style and tallness of the garden ones. These are very small, and as the sun shines on it, the leaves open and you often see a yellow center to it. They're very attractive, but they are small, so they're fine in containers, especially the ones we're talking about. And crocuses, most crocuses, you can have a look and look for smaller ones, but they'll fit in with this. And also snowdrops too. I haven't got, oh yes, I have, missed it though. Snowdrop, which is called Gallianthus nivalis. Snowdrops would fit. So if you're fond of those, they would do very well. And of course, all these bulbs will do well even if it snows in the winter and they're coming up. They don't mind it at all. They're as tough as anything. So it's great fun choosing. I found when I was looking that the bigger garden centres did have all these plants, all these bulbs in bags, but they were a bit more expensive than going to an ordinary supermarket, which happens to have bulbs in, so Lidl or Aldi or one of those ones, where they're much, much cheaper. They're perfectly okay. They might not have the range, but all the ones I got, I found from a supermarket selection, and they were £1.99 a bag. So that's really reasonable. So if you're having to buy lots because you've got lots of different people all planting, have a look at those supermarkets. If you want to have more choice, then you need to go to a garden centre or get it online. And it's still time. This is a good time to be thinking about this. You can plant these bulbs really into November. Better if you do it sooner rather than later, but you know, you don't have to rush. You've got time. Right, so let's just have a quick look at some of the other ones. So top left is the iris, the little iris reticulata, which is very pretty. And there's lots in that sort of shading, tones of dark blues and purples and so on, with this lovely yellow marking. Bottom left is one of the dwarf tulips that I was talking about. So you can see how they're much daintier with a much more open habit than the tulips that you're used to buying. And on the right-hand side is the muscari, or the grape hyacinth, which you have probably seen. And as I said, all these bulbs will repeat from year to year. as long as it's not really wet soil that they're sitting in, as long as everything is well drained, they will keep coming up every year. And if you wanted to change them, you could put them out in the garden if you wanted to have a change of scene too, so they won't mind being moved at all. But there are plenty of these nice dwarf plants, and they're very pretty and attractive and worth having. Okay, so now I'm going to go over to look at how to plant up a container. So I'll stop this now and we'll move on to there. So here on my tabletop, I've got some containers and some bulbs and so on. So just to show you, you don't have to have a huge container. You saw that in the picture. You could go for one that's this size. Doesn't have to be terracotta either. These are just old ones I had in the garden, and they're quite nice to do. So this one's quite a good size because it gives me a chance to have some space to plant plants and to put some bulbs in as well. And just to show you, these are the bulbs that I got. So this is the tulip. So even though it's not, well, its name is Tiny Tom. No, Tiny Timo, sorry. So I know it's going to be a dwarf one, but you can see it has this open habit, which is rather nice. And the information is here on the back. So I can have a look and just make sure that it is as small as I want it to be. And indeed, it's about 20, I think, centimeters, so that's fine. I got some of the nice irises too. And again, it's not telling me it's a dwarf one, but when I look on the back, it'll tell me what size it is, and I know that that's going to do the job. Muscari as well here. And this is a small narcissus, and this one's called Minnow. So again, that indicates it's going to be a small one, but again, I checked on the back. So for £1.99, I get 25 Muscari, 10 narcissus, 10 iris, and 15 tulips. So that's quite a good price. So they're going to be fine for my planting. So I've got a pot, I've got a big hole in the bottom. So I found some bits of old pot, actually ones that broke in frost and were very old. So I'm going to put them over the hole to make sure that I don't lose all my soil. And I'm going to put on my gloves because I'm going to be mixing up the compost and the gravel. So let's put on some gloves to keep our hands safe. I'm going to first mix up, so I'm just going to move this. So I've put my gravel into pots so that I can kind of work out how much I've got. So I'm going to do 1 pot of gravel, 1 pot of compost, and another pot of gravel. There we go. That should be enough. Mixing that up in a container of any sort, whatever, you can squeeze any lumps out of the compost and make sure it's nicely mixed up. So you can actually see the gravel here. There we go. So let's fill up our pot by about 2/3. And what I can do is measure the plants, because I not only got bulbs, but I got plants as well. And just, here's my thrift. So you can see there's one pink flower still on it, and it's got a base, it's got a few stems I'll need to cut off as well. So let's just see how big. So actually that, with this size, that's enough compost and mixture to put in. So I'm just going to squeeze that out, pop that in, make sure it's the right height. Then this is the sempervivum that I got, which you can see is like a succulent, and it's really easy to propagate too. You can use each of these individual sort of florets, group of leaves can be broken apart and put in soil, but I'll just do it as one. It's grown through the pot a bit, so it really needs planting out. There we go. Oh, a couple of slugs. Put those out. Don't want those. Just check there's no more slugs in it either. No, we definitely don't want slugs. Okay, this is a bit of a smaller plant, so I'm going to put a bit more soil in to raise the height of it. Okay, so there you go. Now you might say, well, that's probably enough plants in there, and it could be. Or I could squeeze one more in, but I think we'll leave it at that. Now, if I wanted to put a big stone in to make it look much more like a mountainside, I could put this stone that I had in the garden in at this point. So that can go there. I'll put a bit more compost and then choose some of the bulbs to decorate. So I'm going to put some of these lovely tulips in. Just take my gloves off so I can manage. Now, check on the back. How deep does it say to plant the tulips? It says about 5 centimetres, which is 2 inches, and that's about right. Normally you plant something about 3 times the size of it, 2 or 3 times, and you can see that these are quite small bulbs. They're small because they're dwarf. So that's about right. Now, again, it will probably tell me how far apart to plant them as well. And I'm going to do them fairly close. I think it's telling me about 5 centimetres apart against about 2 inches. But I'm going to put them a little bit closer. Now, you know, with a bulb, you have a pointed end and a flat end. And obviously the flat end goes down because that's where the roots are. So I'm going to put them so they're pointing up, maybe a little closer than 2 inches. Because I want them to look, and I'm going to put 5 there, because I think that'll be a nice collection. Always plant in odd numbers. That's where you get kind of irregular arrangement. So I put those in. Just going to pop on my gloves again and put a little more compost. So let's fill in this corner. What else are we going to do? Now, obviously, I can put more bulbs in the back, and maybe I'll put slightly taller ones in the back as well. But just to finish this so that you can see what you do. So you cover the bulbs completely and you firm it down just gently. And then I've got a bit more gravel here. So I'm just going to sprinkle some gravel here and around the plants. And maybe for decoration, I should I've got some larger stones here. So I think I might put some of those in. Just a few, just naturally sort of thrown on. And that will just make more of a decoration. So you can see that's the idea of how you should be doing it. There are all sorts of plants. Another plant that I saw at a garden centre was this small poppy, which was in the Alpine section. So that might have been a nice plant to put in the back of this arrangement. Or as I say, lots more of these lovely bulbs. So I hope you can have a go at doing that. It's not difficult. Yes, you do need to have grit, gravel, stones. You may be able to get them, as I said, from a DIY store. If you get pea shingle instead of horticultural grit, it's a lot cheaper. So that might be a way of doing it on more of a budget. And I've been reusing these stones, were ones that I had used to plant my winter indoor bulbs last year. So once they went over, I planted the bulbs out and I kept the stones. And so I've been trying to reuse things. This big stone was just something I found in my garden. So it's all possible. And I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you will be planting lots of alpine plants and bulbs for the coming spring. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Caroline. Does anybody have any questions? Feel free to pop them in the chat or unmute and voice your question. I can see that Catherine has got her microphone on. Have you got a question? I don't think so. Does anybody else have a question? Feel free to pop it in the chat. Voice your question. Raise your hand. Nicola's asking, how deep is the pot you just planted in?
Okay, I think that that's about 6 or 7 inches, 15 centimetres. So it's not very deep. You don't need it to be terribly deep. If you do have deeper pots, that's okay as well. You just have to make sure the drainage is good, but it doesn't have to be terribly deep. And I did see in Homebase this week, they had some shallow planters, the sort of things you can put bulbs in as well, but it doesn't have to be terribly deep at all. And the other thing that I didn't mention, which I thought about, was using these small bulbs in hanging baskets or in window boxes. So you could be just putting them there. You may not want to create a whole alpine environment, but they're so nice and small that they fit into small containers wherever you might have them. So that's another way of using them as well.
Laura, are you wanting to unmute?
Yeah, hi. That was lovely, thank you. Lovely photographs as well, Caroline.
Thank you.
I have 2 small ceramic sinks that were planted up probably about 8 years, maybe 9 years ago, and it seems very claggy, the soil, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of grit. Wild strawberries took over it, which I've taken them all out, but everything looks a bit sad. What would you suggest I do?
Replant.
Yeah.
I mean, it depends what the plants are that you've taken out. Are they usable again?
There's some black grass, there's some thrift, and there's one of my dad's, a very kind of straggly succulent that has big yellow flowers on.
Yes, I know.
Quite hardy one.
That's a sedum, yeah.
Yeah, sedum is it? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Either if you can divide them maybe, or if not, just trim them back a bit and replant them into better soil. Obviously, it's the problem with the soil not being that great.
Okay, and more drainage. I think it's maybe
more drainage. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Lovely. I'll give
Absolutely,
it a
more
go.
drainage. And then you can always add bulbs or anything else to kind of perk it up a bit.
Yeah, the bulbs is a lovely idea. I tend to think of them as separate, but I love the way
I
you
know.
combine them. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you ever
Absolutely.
so much.
A pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. Nicola's also asking, can they be kept inside?
Sorry, how would you keep them inside? They're not for inside. Okay, so these are all for putting outside because they are used to very, very cold conditions. So if you wanted to do an inside arrangement, then you'd have to be looking at bulbs that you treat for perhaps growing for Christmas, things like that. So all of the things that I've recommended and the things in the pot are for outside.
Holly, are you wanting to unmute and voice your question?
Hi, yes. Sorry, I had to take a call and I missed you were saying about what the bulbs were. I wrote down some of them, but I just wondered if you could say them again.
Well, the ones that I have, because obviously there's a list on the PowerPoint, so you can look back on that.
Oh, great.
Sorry, just 1 minute. Let me lean over. So this is a small tulip, okay? And this one's called Tiny Timo. So it's kind of indicating that it's a small one. But if you see the look of it, it's got a much more open tulip shape. And that's the giveaway for the small tulips. Muscari, you can perhaps, I don't know whether you can still see a picture of that. Great hyacinth, easy to get, no problem. These are small irises here. And these are called Purple Hill or Blue Hill. So you can see the two different colours in it. They look exactly like an iris will, but they're much, much smaller. Okay. Another one is this narcissus. So it's like a daffodil, but it's narcissus usually indicates a dwarf one, and this one's called minnow. So again, the kind of name gave it away, but I always check on the back if I'm looking, because it's not telling you it's a dwarf, it's not telling you it's an alpine, but as soon as you look at the sizes, then you know. So those were just 3 that I got, as I say, from a supermarket down the road. And I just fished around to look at what was there, having looked in a garden centre and been a bit horrified at the prices. These were much cheaper.
Thank you.
That's okay.
Any more questions for Caroline? I think that might be us for questions. Is there anything else, Caroline, that you want to add before I finish up session?
No, just think differently about what you're buying, really. I think, you know, we get used to buying the same things every year. And I think there's quite a lot of choice in the Alpines and just fun, especially maybe children would enjoy doing them too, as well as whatever group you're working with. They're quite small bulbs. It's not, you don't have to spend a fortune. The main thing is the grit bit and the sort of gravel and so on to make it really well drained. But otherwise you can make really nice little landscapes doing it. So I hope you enjoy it and have fun.